Hi everybody, our next reading task this week is the text on Ruby Bridges that you'll find on the Class Dojo story, or it's been emailed out. As ever, you will have 2 days to do this one, so you will have today, Thursday the 9th of April, and tomorrow, Friday the 10th of April. Now, when you come to do this on the Google Forms, I've put on a video about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and some information about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. Now, this video is going to give you some ideas about segregation and racism in the United States from the time of Ruby Bridges. However, it won't help you to answer the questions. The reason I've put this on is it will give you some background information as to why Ruby Bridges was so important and so iconic. So I would recommend before you read the text, you watch this video because it'll give you some background. So what I would like you to do now is pause the video, go onto the Google Forms link and watch this video. So you're going to pause this video now and watch the video on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Pause this video and watch the Civil Rights video on Google Forms. Okay, now you've watched the video on the Civil Rights Act, we're going to read the text on Ruby Bridges together and we're going to look at some of the key words and what they mean. So, I'm going to read this first section. The title is Ruby Bridges and we've got an illustration of Ruby Bridges on the right. Ruby Bridges, born in Tylertown, Mississippi in 1954, was the first African-American child to go to a white school after desegregation in Southern America. At this time, she was only 6. School segregation. In 1954, the Supreme Court in America ruled that schools would no longer be segregated. This was coincidentally the same year that Ruby was born. Even though it became law to desegregate schools, it took a number of years for African American children to be able to go to white schools, and even then there was a lot of resistance. Okay, let's look at some of the key words. The first key word is African American. It says she was the first African American child. Now, an African American is an American person of African descent. Usually, people from America, Americans who are black, would be called African American. It's not always the case, but it's often how they're used to describe their race, and it's not necessarily a racist term. It can be used as a racist term, but it's not necessarily a racist term. So, the next word is segregation. Desegregation, sorry. Now, if you watch the video on the Civil Rights Act, you'll already know a bit about segregation. So I'm going to actually show the definition of segregation now. So the segregation was when people were separated based on their race. So white people and black people didn't have the same rights. They couldn't sit in the same seats on the bus. They couldn't go to the same schools. There was a lot of things that black people weren't allowed to do that white people were. Now, desegregation, coming back to that word desegregation, was when they started to get rid of some of the racism, not all of it, but they started, and it was the policy, it was when they made it a law that segregation was no longer allowed, so that when black people and white people weren't allowed to be split up anymore. The Supreme Court was in charge of making sure that desegregation came into law. So the Supreme Court is the highest court in the United States. It has 9 judges whose decisions set the rules for all of the other courts in the United States. So the Supreme Court is the highest court, the most important court, some may say. So they were the ones who decided to get rid of segregation coincidentally. So it's coincidentally is a bit like a coincidence. So when 2 things that are related happen at the same time. So desegregation was passed by the Supreme Court, And coincidentally, at the same time, Ruby Bridges was born in that same year. Resistance now. Even though desegregation was made law, there was still a lot of resistance, and what that meant was a lot of people who were racist were still fighting and opposing desegregation. They still wanted racist laws to be in place. So I'm going to read you the next section of the text. So it says, when Ruby was in nursery school in New Orleans, that's a place in America, she took a test to see if she could go to the white school, which had become open to African Americans who passed the test. So even though desegregation was a law, black people couldn't automatically join what were called white schools then. They would have to pass a test, so it's still very hard for them to get in, so it was still unfair. Ruby's father was concerned about her going to the white school because of the trouble it might cause, but her mother was sure that she would get a better education, so again, it was still really unfair. So the black schools wouldn't get as much money as the white schools. The teachers weren't as good. They didn't get as good an education, so Ruby's mum really wanted her to go to the white school so that she could go to a school with more money, better teachers, better facilities. It is widely believed that the test was made hard so that not many children would succeed. However, in 1960, Ruby and her parents found out that she was one of only 6 African American children to pass the test and able to go to white schools in the area. The first day at school. People expected there to be trouble for Ruby when she started at the white William France School, so to keep her safe, she was driven and walked to school by 4 US federal marshals. At school, there were crowds of people protesting, shouting rude names and throwing things because they did not want African American children coming to the white school. There was so much trouble that the white children had been kept at home, so there were no classes that day. A famous painting was done by Norman Rockwell of this iconic walk to school called The Problem We All Live With. So let's look at this language in a bit more depth. So, Ruby's father was concerned, so he was a bit worried about her going to the white school because he knew it would create problems. Oh, I've linked that up with the wrong one. So, here, I've said that it's widely believed. Now, we know what believed means. Now, widely believed means that a lot of people over the whole of the United States believed that when they made the test, they made it so hard that not many people would succeed. And you'll see down here that it obviously worked because only 6 children passed the test. Okay? Now, a US federal marshal is an officer whose duties are like those of a sheriff. So they're almost like a policeman or an army man. So 4 people who were marshals had to accompany Ruby Bridges on a first day of school. Can you imagine that? Think about your brother or sister or cousin or somebody you know joining nursery, and they are so scared that that person will get hurt by adults that they have to send the army with them. She was only 6 years old and they had to send 4 members of the army to protect her because lots of racist people were threatening to hurt her even though she was only a child. Now, protesting is when people gather together, and you'll often see they hold up signs. So I've put up a picture of a protest here as well. They'll hold up signs and they might shout things and they're trying to get there where they're complaining. Now, there were people complaining that Ruby Bridges was even allowed to go to the white school. So they were protesting for racist reasons. They were protesting for the wrong reasons. They were saying that Ruby should not be allowed to go, and that's why they were protesting. Iconic. So iconic means a person or a thing that is of great respect or admiration. Now, Norman Rockwell, who is a very famous painter, painted Ruby Bridges' walk to school, because it was so famous and so admired, because it was the first time a black child went to a white school. So it was a massive step for history. That's why it's iconic, that's why it's famous. Okay, the first year, only one white teacher, Mrs. Henry, agreed to teach Ruby. So again, lots of racist people still. Or a lot of the teachers wouldn't even teach a black child. There was only one teacher who would, Mrs. Henry. Mrs. Henry's choices also made her unpopular with the white parents, but she did not care and saw Ruby as the most important. Other parents kept their white children away from Ruby, so for a whole year there was only Ruby and Mrs. Henry together in one classroom for lessons, break times, and even for meals. So the parents of the other children were very racist as well. They wouldn't let their child go to school with a black child, which today would not happen. Thankfully, after the first year, white children started to return to Ruby's class and the federal marshals stopped taking her to school. She'd found the first year very hard and knew that children did not want to play with her because of the colour of her skin. So again, things started to get slightly better. In the first year, the white parents wouldn't let their children go anywhere near poor Ruby because of the colour of her skin. In the second year, they started to learn that just because she had a different colour skin, it didn't make her a bad person, that she was equal to the other children. So they started to let the children go. However, they still wouldn't allow their children to play with her. Later years, Ruby went on to be successful. She graduated from high school and had a good career. She had 4 sons and is now a civil rights activist focusing on making life fair for black and white people living together. In 2014, a statue of Ruby was placed outside William Frantz School. In 2001, she was awarded a medal from President Bill Clinton, and in 2011, she looked at the Norman Rockwell painting with President Barack Obama, and he said to her, "I think it's only fair to say that if it hadn't been for you guys, I might not be here." So, it says she graduated from high school. What that means is that a person has finished studying at the school and they're given a certificate to say that they've done all the things to pass. Because she managed to graduate from high school, she managed to get a good career. A civil rights activist is somebody who fights so that everybody has the same rights. The right to vote, the right to own property, the right to have a fair trial if they do something wrong. Now, Ruby fights for those rights. She's an activist. She's one of the people who fights for those rights. I think it's important while we're on this as well to just think about this quote from Barack Obama. So, we know that Barack Obama was the first African American president, the first black president. So what he's saying is that I think it's fair to say that if it hadn't been for you guys, I might not be here. So even though Ruby was only a little girl, she was only 6 when she first went to school, she did an incredibly brave thing. She was the first black person to do this, and she went even though she was treated appallingly. And by going to school, she helped to change people's opinions and helped to break down racism. She didn't get rid of it all alone, but she did help. And what President Barack Obama is saying here was that without people like Ruby Bridges who did brave things, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to be president because it had never happened before. Now that we have looked at the text, your task is to go onto the Google Forms link and complete the questions. Make sure you put in your full name, read the questions, and I will be awarding dojos to those of you who complete the quiz. Thank you very much. Bye bye.